Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Spectrum Perspectives. And today I'm here with Lisa Sosnowski. Hi, Lisa. How are you?
Good. How are you?
So Lisa is an autism mom, and she also has many other things that we're going to talk about. But Lisa, I always start at the very beginning. Let's go back. You have a son with autism, correct?
Correct. He's 17 years old.
And what's
So
his
he was
name?
born Stephen.
Steven? Okay. So let's go back to when you were pregnant with Steven, and you went for prenatal visits. Were there any kind of red flags or anything from the doctor?
No, none at all. My pregnancy was very normal. I didn't have a lot of issues with it at all. The only thing that I did have was a sinus infection where they put me on antibiotics during the pregnancy, which is a little concerning because when I was a child, I was tested and they said I was allergic to penicillin. So they had to give me clindamycin, which the safety tests are not what what they are for penicillin. Um, we
Okay.
asked the pharmacist, and they're like, "Well, it's could be safe, but
Hmm.
I can't say 100%." Right?
Right.
So
Right. Right.
that was an issue
Yeah. Yeah.
when I was about 3 months pregnant with him.
Okay. Yeah, we always do that, especially when your kid's diagnosed. The doctors ask you so many questions. You're like, I don't know. I think I took Tylenol once. Like, I don't know. You start thinking of
Right,
everything that could have gone wrong. When I was pregnant with Robbie, I had twin girls and they both got the chicken pox.
right,
And I slept in the bed with them while they had chicken pox and stuff. And I was probably only a month pregnant. And I thought maybe that was it. But I had another friend that also had twins, and our kids all got the chicken pox together. She got pregnant the exact same time as me,
right,
and her kids were fine. So I'm like, well,
right.
wait, well, but her kids were fine. It didn't cause autism in hers. Why would it cause autism? And, you drive yourself crazy with that stuff. All right. So
Right.
labor and delivery, anything go wrong with that?
He was a big baby. He was 9 pounds, 3 ounces.
Hmm.
So they did use the vacuum,
Hmm.
and it did bruise the back of his head. I
Hmm.
always think that definitely caused some kind of cranial trauma there.
Hmm.
So we do
Hmm.
do cranial sacral therapy now, and he
Hmm.
does have an overbite, and I think that's all connected with that.
Okay, interesting. And then how was his development? Was he on time? Walking, crawling?
He was pretty much on time. He was a little bit of a later walker, around 15 months, like independently, but I think that had to do a lot with my fear as being a first time mom and being like every time he would try to,
Right.
walk, and I'd be afraid he's going to fall. So
Hmm.
that was it. But he actually was an early talker. He spoke his first words at 7 months, and
Seven
then he said,
months.
"Yep." At seven
Wow.
months, he said, "Good, good, good." I have video of it. I
Hmm.
actually have video of it. So I really liked Alton Brown, watched the Food Network a lot, and I was trying to get him to say "good eat"
Oh.
together so we could record it and say,
Maybe that's where he
"Look,
got it from. He had the TV on. He kept hearing
make
it.
my baby famous,"
Yeah.
But he did lose language. My son did have a regression.
When at around
Um,
2 years old?
Around 16 months old, he had a regression. He started getting chronic ear infections. Like,
Ah,
we would go to the doctors, he'd have an ear infection.
yeah.
He would get antibiotics. They'd come
Yeah.
back, they'd say he's fine. Let's continue on the regular schedule
Hmm.
that they do for children. And then 2 weeks later, we'd be back and he'd be on antibiotics again because he'd have an ear infection.
Yeah.
And it didn't clear up. And that happened for about 6 months until we were like, this is not normal. He's constantly sick. He's not talking now. And the pediatrician was like, "Oh, well, he's a boy and that's normal and he's sick. So
Yeah.
don't think of him stopping speaking as anything to be concerned about, but we'll send you to an ENT."
Yeah.
And, then, we wound up getting ear tubes.
Yep.
We
We
were
did all
already in
that.
early intervention as well
Hmm.
at that point in time, but she's not the one that actually pointed us toward early intervention. It was a chiropractor because we were going there because of the chronic ear infections. And he said, you know, if you're concerned that your son, you know, stopped speaking and he's not pointing, maybe you should contact early intervention. And that kind of started our journey because I had no idea about autism, really.
Mhm.
Like most, like most of us, I think that start on this journey that you really
Right,
don't know anything about it.
right.
And that's where it began. And we've had definitely a rocky experience, I have to say, throughout um, this whole journey.
Yeah. My son also, he had the chronic ear infections. We got the tubes in the ears, and our early intervention was with Summit Speech School for hearing impaired kids because we
Okay.
thought that's what it was. We thought that maybe he didn't hear high pitched sounds, and that's why the
Right.
speech delay and all of that. But it was as we were going through that, one of the therapists said, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but I think this is autism.
Right. Because
And there was no internet back then, so I had what's autism, I don't know. So so all right, so he had a speech regression though, but did he completely lose his words or no?
yes, completely lost his words. No words whatsoever. And I became concerned with that.
Sure.
And, you know, I think a lot of times pediatricians just say, "Oh, you're a mom, you're a first time mom, you're
Yeah, they think you
nervous.
panic. Yeah, you worry too
You don't
much.
you worry too much."
Did
But
we have the
I
same
was
pediatrician? Yeah.
it's a common story. I know it's a common
Mhm.
story. And, you know, we went into early intervention. We started having gut issues with him, very, very chronic constipation,
Yep.
which
Yes, same thing.
yeah, which,
You're
you
describing
know,
the
we
same
know a
child.
lot about the microbiome now. So we know that being on excessive amounts of antibiotics could definitely negatively affect that. And there's studies where now they did a study on people with Parkinson's, and they think it's actually gut virus going into the brain through the vagus nerve.
Huh.
They're doing a study on that because people used to think that it was just caused by acid, um, people getting ulcers. So they used to do something called a vagotomy. There was a partial and a full where they would cut the vagus nerve so you wouldn't create the acid in the stomach. And what they noticed with these people, they had a very, very low incidence of Parkinson's disease. So we now know that H. pylori causes ulcers. So they think that, um, you know, the virus could be going up, and they've actually duplicated it in mouse studies where they've cut the vagus nerve of the mice and they do not get Parkinson's.
Hmm.
Um, so definitely something connected there. We don't realize how much the gut and the brain is connected through our
Yeah.
bodies.
Yeah. Interesting. I was just listening to a podcast before I came on here with you, and he was talking about the brain, and I was surprised to hear him get onto the gut as well. He's considered a brain expert. Um, so hopefully they keep studying that. So let's continue to talk about your son. So he went into early intervention. When did he start school?
He started school at 3. We went into you know, a preschool program. We actually moved because we heard, you know, where we live is, you know, a very good program. So we picked up sticks and we moved because we were in central New Jersey. Now we're in, you know, the Monmouth County area. So we did that. And the first year, I guess I saw some improvements, but when he was going into like the kindergarten, first grade, um, he would lay down in the hallways when he was transitioning because he had a lot of sensory issues, and he would look where the ceiling and the wall met. So what they did, they were suggesting that we put a hood on his head, like blinders on a horse,
Hmm.
to prevent that. And I was like, you're not doing that to my child. So
Mhm.
we had to get a lawyer, get out of district, went into a private school placement. Um, and I don't think a lot of the behavioral methods are very effective for kids on the spectrum.
Mhm.
I understand why people do it because you're trying to help your child and you're being told this. But if you're not really defining what the root cause of those behaviors are, you're really not going to get the progress. You're just going to get someone that's complying at all costs, which could be causing trauma in a lot of cases. Because we
Hmm.
know that 60% of autistics now say that they have PTSD-like symptoms.
Hmm.
So that is a large amount of people in the population, considering a lot of people in the population are unable to communicate that.
Hmm.
So we know it's low.
Right. Right. It's something my other son teaches at his school for autistic kids, and he'll mention some of the behaviors, and I keep saying to him, but why? Why? You have to get to the root. What is causing the behavior? Why are they upset? There's a reason. There's always a reason. And
Right.
behavior is
People don't,
communication.
right. All behavior is communication. There
Mhm.
is
There's
no
something
other
wrong.
reason for the
Something's
behavior.
bothering them. Yeah.
Right. And especially with people that don't have speech, it's very difficult for them to communicate what is wrong. And a lot of times people assume that they're just having a behavior for no reason. And
Yeah.
that's not often the case. A lot of co-occurring conditions happen in this population: gut issues,
Yeah.
epilepsy. We don't even know because people cannot communicate. And even people that do have speech talk about situational mutism, where they get so much anxiety that they actually lose the ability to speak, even though
Mm.
they're very verbal people.
Mm.
In fact, one of the people we just added on our board, we added 2 autistic women to our board because it's very important for us to have that inclusion.
Mhm.
And she talks about that a lot. She's very, very verbal. She has her own blog. She's the Articulate Autistic.
Mhm.
And she says there is situational mutism where she cannot speak when she is under um, like a very stressful situation.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, my wheels spin, as you talk, and I'm thinking of different scenarios of that I know that happens. Um, okay, so he's in a private school, so this was a school for autistic kids, or?
Yep, a school for autistic kids. We had originally wanted to be in a multiple disabled school, but they wouldn't let us go into that. They said, oh, he has too many behaviors. You have to have him in a behavioral program.
Mhm.
So we went into a um, a private school that was very, I would say, very strict ABA.
Yeah.
And it was okay, I guess, until he started getting older. When he was about 10 years old, one day I picked him up and he was crying, and they had to tell me that he was injured and he had big scratches. I have pictures of this, big scratches on his arms because they were holding him down for hours when he was having behaviors
Mm.
without notifying me.
Hmm.
Um, they weren't notifying me that this was happening. Second of all, it was concerning when the teacher told my husband that, oh, we started getting worried about, hour 3. I'm like, what are you doing holding someone down for 3 hours? That's, first of all, dangerous.
Yeah.
Second of all, you're causing people trauma. And, that's what they do a lot of times for kids once they get to middle school age. And I learned this from the other autistic woman on the board. She is actually a child development and family relations specialist, and she works as a paraprofessional in both public and private schools. And she says once children get to about a middle school age, they start really ramping up the behavioral program because they want them to comply. So they start doing things
Mm.
that will actually elicit behaviors. One time she said a girl, they took away her food. Like, you
Mm.
don't even, a person that's non-speaking, you take away their food, you don't know if they have food insecurity at home. And obviously the girl had, an aggressive behavior, and then it's right away you go into the CPI holds. In fact, she she said, I think that the record was about 70 CPI holds in one day she was called to do.
Wow.
So most people don't realize that this is going on
Hmm.
because they're not telling you. And that's a concern as a parent and just as a person that you're doing this to people. You think
Right.
we've advanced in like the mental health field, and to me, it doesn't sound like it. I mean, there was that whole campaign about Stop the Shock. I
I
don't
don't
know
know
if
what
you've
that
heard
is.
about that.
No.
There's a school up in New York State that actually shocks people to get them to comply.
Oh, come
It's
on.
like an
Still?
ABA
They
tactic.
still use that
Yes,
nonsense? No, that's
yes,
ridiculous.
yep.
That's
If you look up
ridiculous.
hashtag Stop the Shock, there's a whole
Yeah.
big campaign about that. In fact, the Autistic Advocacy
Wow.
Network
Wow.
has a big campaign about that.
Well,
ASAN.
when they hit puberty, though, their behaviors really ramp up. I mean, they can really start getting violent and aggressive. So I can understand why they would feel the need to amp it up, as they get older. Um, what's the answer, do you think? What do you think is the alternative?
Well, the alternative, I think, is we just have to change the entire system. I think we're not giving people enough chance to communicate. I think we're not giving people enough chance to really show what they can do. It must be very frustrating if you can do things and someone's treating you like you're an infant all the time. Um,
Hmm.
and especially when you're a teenager, I can just imagine if you were treating a neurotypical teenager like an infant, how they would react to you. I mean,
Hmm.
you get, during the teenage years, you're going to get pushback because that's just the way the brain develops. It's
Hmm.
supposed to create this space and independence from caregivers so they can go and, leave the nest one day and have this
Hmm.
independence. And in autism, we still have, certain things that are developing on time while we have other areas of the brain that aren't developing on time or that are stuck, because a lot of times we're pounding the square peg into the round hole instead of really looking at where the person's strengths are, where their interests are. A lot of times when they're going for a job in transitions and they're looking for jobs for people, they're putting them in public facing positions, which, not exactly the proper position for an autistic person. That they have issues with communication and socialization as it is.
Hmm.
Maybe we should look for something where they're good at something. I mean, my son's very good at photography. He loves it, and he started where he was taking pictures of his trains. He loved Thomas. He loved to act out different Thomas scenes, and we used to do that constantly.
Hmm.
And he started taking pictures of that. And I'm like, why can't we see if he'll take pictures of landscapes? And he started doing it. Now he asks, to have the camera. We'll go hiking and he'll ask to take pictures. So,
Hmm.
um, and, we're talking about someone who would not be given this opportunity in a school setting because they would make the assumption that he doesn't have the cognition. Yet I will tell the story that when my son was 5 years old, we used to get him a lot of flashcard apps because I always felt, well, at least if he can understand what I'm saying, that's half the battle, even if he can't speak to me. And some of them were high level, flashcards because it's for people that are learning English. So um, to tell us that he wanted to go to Turkey Swamp Park in Jackson at 5 years old, he showed me the picture of the flag of the country of Turkey and a
Oh,
picture of a swamp.
oh, wow.
Not a turkey animal, the country of
Yeah.
Turkey, because I guess
Wow.
he figured out this is a physical place, so I
Right.
have to show this. It's not an animal. I
Right.
I want to go to a certain place, and here's the swamp and here's the picture of the flag of Turkey. And
Right.
I would tell them at the schools and they'd be like, "Oh yeah." And then they're doing kindergarten work with him and I'm like, "You're just not presenting what you're teaching him correctly. He's not learning it the way you want him to learn,
Right.
sitting at a table with a piece of paper. That's not interesting to him."
Hmm.
Especially like my son, not that we ever had a formal diagnosis, but I suspect that he also has ADHD. He's very busy all the time with
Hmm.
things. So
Hmm.
a lot of times with ADHD, it's novelty that interests people.
Hmm.
Once that novelty wears off, they
Yeah, they're
kind of
bored.
check out. Yeah, they're
Mm,
bored. They check out. So, that's not going to happen with a piece of paper and you're going to say, okay, Stephen, do
right,
this and you'll get a token and then you get 5 minutes on your iPad once you
right,
earn enough tokens. And
right.
that really is not a realistic thing if you want somebody to work. You're not going to have my son do 5 minutes of work and then get a token and do 5 minutes of work and get a token and then
Right.
finally get his iPad.
Yeah.
And you're going to give him, at the end of the week, oh, here's your paycheck. He'll be like, yeah, okay. And I'll throw it or something. I'm,
Hmm.
I'm telling you the truth. Like,
Hmm.
I know my son, he'll be like, yeah, well, what's this? Like, what's the value of this for me?
Right.
I want that instant gratification. And we're kind of teaching kids that too at the same time. And I understand why they're doing it because they're trying to elicit a response and teach someone. But there's a lot of studies, if you have external rewards constantly, you really kill intrinsic motivation. So you need that intrinsic motivation to actually perform a job later on in life. And that's why we have 90% of autistics as unemployed or underemployed, because they're just not prepared for the
Hmm.
workplace, right?
Right. Right. So he's 17 now, so he's still in school.
Yep, he's still in school. He's actually in a different program because we had another incident with the previous school. After the holding down, we were like, you can't do that anymore.
Right.
And they weren't doing it for a while, but then they decided to change a behavioral program to what they say is intermittent reinforcement. So after having someone being constantly reinforced, now you're going to intermittent reinforcement after 10 years of another program.
Hmm.
And basically what they were doing was they were giving him the iPad. They'd say, okay, time to clean up. And he'd say, my time. And they would either say, yes, you can have it, or no, you can't. And when they said, no, you can't, once he would comply, they'd give it back to him. So that's kind of confusing.
Yeah,
We
that
don't know
is.
if yes is yes. So then he
Right.
became so anxious that he didn't trust anything I was saying. And he would actually record me like 100 times a day telling him his schedule. He became incredibly OCD and anxious to the point where he was pinching himself and pinching other people because he just didn't know what to do with himself anymore. And we actually had to remove him from that program because he lost 10 pounds because we see a GI doctor. So
Hmm.
he always weighs him and he's like, what happened? He lost 10 pounds since I
Wow.
last saw him. And we were like, this is definitely not working. So we went and we pulled him from the program and then we had a fight again,
Yeah.
you know, to get him in another program, even though obviously he was exhibiting all these, um, you know, anxiety, all this anxiety and things like that.
Hmm.
So we have him now, we have him doing like a trauma, program with Sandtray, which is for, pre-verbal or limited verbal people
Hmm.
to be able to act out what happened to them.
Oh, tell me about that. I don't know anything about that.
It's they give you figures and it's like like a sandbox and
I mean,
they
this sounds
ask
like
you
therapy.
questions. It is therapy. It is therapy.
Right.
Which is what we're doing, as well as we continued with craniosacral therapy because we've been doing that since he was 9.
Hmm. And what is that?
That is uh like a somatic process where you do very light touch manipulation of the cranium and other areas of the body. So it really helped him with his speech because
Is that a
it helped.
specialty that someone does? Like who does
Yeah, it
something
is.
like that?
Um, it could be we go to a person who's a clinical doctor of physical therapy,
Okay.
and she's actually vice president of my board.
Okay.
But there are OTs that do it. There are massage therapists that
Okay.
do it,
Hmm.
where she works on making the body calm, and then it is manual manipulation. She goes inside his mouth. He has an overbite. We've been working on that
Hmm.
more gentle way than braces, which I don't think are going to be possible for us.
Right. Right. Okay, so tell me more about the trauma therapy.
Well, the sand tray, I actually found that because I was like, how am I going to deal with this trauma
Hmm.
since he cannot, talk therapy is not going to work for that. So what we did was um, I began researching, and I'm like, what would you do with a child that's young, that couldn't speak, that went through some kind of trauma, and then they have this sand tray therapy where you work with someone who is a licensed therapist, and they work in the sand tray, and you get to act out things. And the first time I went to the sand tray, they really keep everything private. So whatever happens in sand tray, unless Steven says it's okay for them to tell me, they don't
Right.
tell me.
Right.
But they wanted to show me, what they do the first time we met them, and they wanted him to feel comfortable. So I was in there with the therapist, and my son has anxiety with hotels, and we have no idea why this happened, because he didn't at first, and then it happened. So she was like, "Oh, what happens when somebody goes to a hotel?" And like she had all these like emotion cards, words with emotions, and like he put like emotions like happy and everything like that. And they're like, "Oh, what happens when Stephen goes on vacation to a hotel?" And he was like happy, and then he was like frightened. He put that in there. So I was like, okay, well, obviously he is communicating that correctly, because he
Mhm.
didn't, like, she met with me separately, you know, to be told this. So it's not like I said it in front of him and he would know what I wanted him to say.
Hmm.
He
Right.
that came up, and I was like, well, obviously that's true. So let's continue, you know, with what's going on,
Hmm.
because obviously this, you know, last program was creating some severe trauma in him that, we worked on a lot of doing
Did
a
they
lot of
go to,
nature hikes.
did the program take him to a hotel for anything? Like when would he have gone to a hotel
No,
not with
no,
you?
no, no, no. That was just something separate. I don't know
Oh,
why he got upset. We do know that one time that we did go to the hotel, he had an abscess on his tooth, which we didn't know. So
oh,
he could
okay.
associate that pain
Yeah,
with
right.
going to a hotel room, because
Okay.
what most people don't realize with autism, and I find as the most difficult part of it, is if you make a mistake, that mistake can haunt you for a long time because your child remembers it. And it's very hard to explain to them that, oops, that was a mistake, or oops, that's not going to happen every time we go to a hotel. You're not going to have, pain. It's just your tooth,
Right.
was hurt and mom and dad didn't know. We're sorry.
Hmm.
You can't really, you know, it's not as easily conveyed, because I do think part of autism is this overactive nervous system where, once trauma occurs, and trauma is based on perception, it's not based on the actual event.
Right.
They know that from twin studies, that one twin will be affected and one twin won't, because it's the perception that the person has of the event. So you don't know, with someone with different sensory perception than you, what they are actually experiencing, if it actually is trauma. Because in a lot of cases you'll speak with autistic adults and they'll talk about, sensory pain. It's not just a sensitivity, it's painful. So if you're asking someone to continually go through pain when you're ignoring sensory needs or something like that and just focusing on behavior, you're
Yeah.
actually possibly creating trauma for someone. And once somebody's traumatized, your body is overactive to trauma then,
Hmm.
because different parts of your brain grows, that the part that actually experiences trauma actually gets bigger and more sensitive, and your sensory system gets more sensitive. So a lot of these sensory sensitivities could actually be an effect of trauma.
Hmm.
and not the person's sensory system.
Okay, um, so you're going through these therapies, and he's 17, so he'll go to school till he's 21.
Yes.
Okay. So tell me about your the center that you have now. It's the Spectrum Tech Trade School. What is that?
Right. It's actually Spectrum Tech Trade School, Village, and Training Center, because we plan to be more than just, we want to be a vocational school for autism, where we're actually going to look at people's strengths and we're going to develop programs based on that.
Mhm.
So we can actually get people employed, doing jobs that they're good at,
Right.
giving them self-esteem, right? But it's more than that. It's going to be interconnected properties and also collaborations with cross-sector networks, because it's a big idea where we want to collaborate with other nonprofits. I want a village where my son can go and live and be, um, having supported independence, where he could go and shop by himself in a place where there's people that are going to watch out for him, and I don't have to worry when I'm gone from this earth, basically. And where we have a network where families don't feel so isolated, because that is one of the biggest things that families feel, I think,
Mhm.
isolation, with this whole journey, where, you know, family and friends just do not know how to react to your child, especially as they get older. When they're young, it's not so much of a difference, but when your child gets older,
Right. When they're young
uh,
and they're cute, and you can, it's different when they get older, and yeah,
right. So
and
so
people don't
spectrum,
understand, yeah, what's going on. Yeah, it's different.
exactly. People don't understand. So
And it's true. And you get isolated from your own family members. You don't get invited to things. You don't,
right,
it's
right.
it,
Oh,
yeah. Hmm.
yeah, I know. I'm there. I'm there. But
I know.
really what we're trying to do is create an immersive, experiential, interconnected, dynamic learning program based on a student's strengths and interests, with wraparound co-treating intensive whole person therapeutic supports in a tranquil, trauma-informed setting. So we want these vocational schools to be on organic farms, where we can also be, working with other, farms that are teaching autistic adults, um, the trade of agriculture, except,
Hmm.
eventually those people have to make money. So I would love to pay adults, because obviously my students are going to be learning and they're not going to be able to take care of an entire farm. But if we employ adults as kind of like a peer mentor, as well as, um, you know, getting people employed. That's the basic thing. We don't want to have free farm hands all across the state.
Right.
The idea is we want people to actually have jobs.
Hmm.
And my goal is to work with these other programs, give people jobs, teach, our students, and we want to instill this love of learning, because I don't think in the autistic community that is. It's more of, let's comply, let's behave, but we want to really instill a love of learning, because then someone will learn for the rest of their lives.
Hmm.
You know, you I'm 53. I can't believe I'm doing something totally different than I ever planned on doing. And we want to use, empowering and supportive network, while, creating using brain-based science to create the optimum, environment for learning for the neurodivergent brain.
What ages
Um,
is the trade school for?
well, everybody tells me I need a narrow focus, to
I
start
mean, is
out.
this for after they graduate after 21, or do you want it to be like a voc tech, like when they're sort of like high school age, they can come, or
Well, it's going to be like a VOTEC, but I also want adult programs, because there are, adult programs at the neurotypical VOTEC as well. So we can do adult programs, we can do, high school programs, and I would love to, eventually be, just across the lifespan, and then do this supported independent model in the village, where we're going to have housing and,
I was going to
places
ask
for
you,
people
are you
to.
going to, you working on residential as well?
Um,
That's the dream, the goal.
well, I would like housing, in the village. I also would be open to adults um, doing residential on the actual farm, but I would like to. I'm not going to do residential for high school age. Um, Probably starting, 18 and up.
Hmm.
It would be.
Right. Um, it's interesting because some people that I have interviewed are very much into the whole inclusion model, and they don't want their kids, they don't want them isolated away somewhere. Um, they want them right in the middle of town with everybody else, and they really want the world to accept and include their, you know, young adults with special needs. But um, but others want, like you say, they want them to be in a safe environment where when you're not there anymore, you don't have to worry about what's going to happen to them, because the world can be a cruel place.
Well, we know by the statistics, 90% of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have either been sexually abused or assaulted, and 50% of them will be done 10 or more times in their life. That is giving my son basically a 10% chance of being okay.
Hmm.
So inclusion's great, but that's what inclusion is getting us. And
Hmm.
are you going to be able to change the mindset of everyone to change those statistics that drastically that you can feel safe about your child?
Hmm.
I don't know. I would rather do a reverse inclusion model. Anyone can come to the village. I wouldn't,
Right.
turn anyone away, but it's going to be a safe environment for my child
Hmm.
and other people on the spectrum. And it's
Hmm.
going to be tailored to them and
Right.
their sensory needs. And,
Hmm.
if you're not going to be kind and you're not going to be accepting, then you're not invited.
Right. 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 Yeah, I think as moms, we want to protect our kids. We just do.
That's the number one thing. I mean,
Hmm.
my son's safety and happiness
Right.
are the two most important things to me.
Right.
You know, he tells me Steve drive tractor, so he does want to drive a tractor, and I will try to make that possible for him. He does drive his own go-kart. A lot of
Does he?
people, yes, I actually
Okay.
had a grandmother who took her grandson to therapy, and he was very verbal, and she was like, I can't believe your son is not like the same person. I saw him driving a go-kart. I couldn't believe it was the same child. I'm like, just because he doesn't speak
Right.
doesn't mean he can't perform other things.
Right. Right.
It's a big misconception in this community that if you don't speak like a neurotypical person, that you
Right.
have cognitive delays or you can't perform certain duties.
Right.
And I think that's a real detriment to our kids
Right.
because it's not giving people opportunities
Right.
that they could be doing something. I
Right.
mean, somebody could be an incredible artist. My son is an incredible photographer. He actually won this picture back here,
Hmm.
won second place for teens in the Alaire Industry and Nature photo contest. He,
Hmm.
which he was very proud of
Hmm.
when he got his trophies back there. He won fan favorite too. He has two trophies. So
Oh, awesome.
he was very proud of himself.
Yeah, that's cute.
I could tell he was beaming
Yeah.
when he was presented the
Yeah.
trophies. So
Yeah. Because he found something he could do well,
yeah. And a lot of times our
and was
kids aren't given that.
acknowledged for it.
Right. And a lot of times our kids don't have that feeling.
Hmm.
So like we even did when we did our fundraiser this year, we did a wine tasting and I did an art festival where I invited other autistic artists from other programs to show
Hmm.
their work.
Hmm.
And they were very proud to show their work. And I was thanked by the families because they said that, you know, you don't even know how you affected my child, that they were actually celebrated for something that they do.
Right.
And I think we need to do that.
Right.
We need to give autistic people a chance to be celebrated for what they're good at.
Hmm. Yeah. One thing that I've learned again from doing interviews is moms that used RPM or the S2C method of communication, and they're so shocked to find out all the things that their kids really did know. And like you said, they've been treated like a toddler this whole time in school, and meanwhile they know like your son showing you the country of Turkey. Like there's so much that they actually know that we have no idea. So just because they can't speak doesn't mean they don't understand, and it doesn't mean that they don't know things. We have no idea how much they know. Um, and I feel like you said that what needs to be changed is stop treating the behavior as just a behavior, figure out what the triggers are, figure out what's really going on, but find new ways for them to communicate. Try to use whatever method possible to figure out how they can communicate so they can find out what's really going on inside there. And one of the
Right. And
moms she's been fighting and fighting her school system, because her twin boys are both autistic. They both use S2C, spelling to communicate, and the schools won't use it. And she's been fighting and fighting them, and finally they said okay. And she had to come in and train the teachers in how to do it, and now they're finally using it. So it takes moms fighting for
right.
their kids to just not stop. You just got to keep
But
speaking up.
we shouldn't have to do that. We should presume competence in people because it's the way. If someone feels that you believe in them, you're going to get so much more out of them than if you constantly, touch your head, touch your head. You don't know if somebody's having a behavior just because they're like, just stop. I just
Right.
can't stand you asking me this, you
Right.
know,
Right.
again, I
Right.
know this. I've known this
Right.
for
Because we're assuming
10
they know
years.
nothing. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're just assuming it because a lot I have seen, I read the book Underestimated. I know about S2C. And can you imagine? I can't make my body do what I want it to do. So
Right.
people just assume that I can't respond.
Yes, that's what they keep saying. Yes.
Right. Because there's a delay. There is a delay
Right.
with the processing. And
Hmm.
I can attest to that because Jamie Heidel, the articulate autistic who's on my board, will tell you that she has auditory processing delay.
Hmm.
And we actually put closed captioning on our Zoom so she can actually read along because it does affect her that much. And she is someone who is incredibly verbal and articulate, you know.
Hmm.
So you can't make that assumption that it's just because somebody doesn't understand. Can you imagine not having that? That's why people aren't looking at you because, it's like a foreign film. They're seeing the lips move and they're hearing something that was said, 2 minutes ago.
Right.
That has to be incredibly distracting. I
Right.
mean, to try to focus on what somebody's saying and not have that sync up. So sensory is so much more than just, sensitivities or, sensory aversions. No,
Yeah.
it's like a perception thing. And then there's coordination between the different senses,
Right.
which we take for granted, but we have to drill down on these things. And that's the
Yes.
idea of Spectrum Tech. We're going to drill down on these things and find out real individualized programming. They tell you it's individualized, but it's not really individualized because, auditory processing can have many different factors. It can,
Yeah.
like I said, it could be perception, it could be not coordination between visual and auditory. Same thing with speech. If you're teaching someone who has motor issues with their mouth and you're doing drills, that's going to do nothing except frustrate them.
Right.
That's not going to help them at all. That is not their problem.
Right.
It's not their problem. It's not that they don't understand you. It's not that they don't want to say the word. It's because they
They
can't
can't.
coordinate their motor planning, right?
Hmm.
So that's what we have to work on. Working on the other stuff is wasting the person's time as well as wasting the speech therapist's time. If you're doing that, you're just frustrating person. The person doesn't want to speak to you anymore. They've given up on themselves. You don't want that. You want to give somebody a chance to communicate. And then if they really want to speak, my son really wanted to speak because they wanted me to give up on any expressive language for his IEP a long time ago. And I said, no, I don't want to do that because he constantly is trying to speak. And thus, then I found the craniosacral. And then she started going in there and releasing some of the tension that was in his mouth. And I actually had a speech therapist say, wow, he can say sounds now that he could never say before. So, that was validation for me.
Hmm. He
But,
uses an
nothing.
AAC device, doesn't he? Doesn't he use a device?
We have a device for him, but he always preferred to speak to me
Yeah.
verbally.
Yeah.
And what we're doing now, though, is we do have him in AAC because we're trying to get him to increase what he can say at school to show them what he can do,
Hmm.
basically. Because obviously, if you're, asking someone who has, dyspraxia of his body, so he doesn't write that well, or it takes him a lot of energy to write something, and then he's concentrating on that, not concentrating on the answer. Or he knows that, the faster he answers, the more time he gets on his iPad, and it doesn't matter if he gets it right or not. So,
Right.
I mean, he's smart enough to figure that out. So he's just
Right.
like, whatever, this
Right.
means nothing to me. That's why we're talking about experiential learning. So someone knows that you're
Mhm.
learning this because this is a practical application of this, and this is
Right.
how this is going to suit you. I mean, kids talk about it all the time, neurotypical kids. I'm never going to use this in my
Right.
everyday life. I
Right.
mean, if somebody doesn't see value in it, they're really not going to pay attention,
Right.
because the brain is kind of made that way. So you don't
Yeah.
pay attention to everything, because if you paid attention to everything, you'd have a lot of what autistic people say, that when they have sensory overload, they're just paying attention to everything and your brain's getting
Right.
overloaded.
Right. Right.
But your brain pays attention to what it thinks is important. So if you don't think a subject is important, you're
Yeah.
definitely not going to do well in it. I mean, that's
Right.
what neurotypical kids do. And you see
Hmm.
it with people's interests. Somebody who's interested in history will do great in history, but other people are just
Hmm.
like, why do I need to know this? Who cares?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, the podcast I was listening to this morning, the brain expert, he was saying that your brain basically is a filter and it's filtering things out all day long, because if it took in everything, it would be complete sensory overload. So it's exactly what you're saying.
Right,
And that's why you
exactly.
forget things, because if it's not really important to you, you're not really focusing on it, your brain just filters it out.
Right. So we need to find a way. Ooh, sorry, I'm like kicked my table there. Um, we need to really focus on what the person's interests are, so they do
Right.
pay attention to what
Hmm.
we're
Hmm.
teaching them, and we need to incorporate that learning into something that's practical for them. I believe that is the way it'll stick in there, and they'll be like, oh, okay, I need this because
Hmm.
of this,
Right.
not just like, oh, 2 + 2 is 4. Well, what does that matter? Well, we need to know how to count money so we can
Right.
buy things at the store, right?
Yeah. You need to
So
yeah.
that's where we're learning math, instead
Right.
of, on a piece of paper where it's intangible, and
Hmm.
it's like, I'm not going to pay attention to this because there's flickering lights and there's somebody else in the corner that's humming, and I can hear that. And, I mean,
Hmm.
you know, your
Yeah.
brain starts paying attention to other things, and
Right.
that's what happens.
Right. Right. So tell me about so at the trade school. So when did you start this? You're a 501(c)(3), right? But
We're 501(c)(3). We started right before COVID.
okay.
So that really put a big wrench
Hmm.
the whole
Yeah, the
being
whole
able
production of
to,
everything. Yeah.
fundraise or anything like that.
Hmm.
Because we started working with a few other nonprofits, and we were meeting with them that have the farms, and we were starting to fill out the 501(c)(3) paperwork, because we decided we'll do it ourselves. We have quite a few business people on the board. So
Hmm.
we're like, we can figure this out ourselves. And then COVID hit and
Hmm.
everything shut down. And there was a flood of people applying for 501(c)(3) because they were trying to feed people, and just people were in crisis.
Hmm.
So we did finally get our paperwork done, but during the meantime, we couldn't meet to do any fundraising. We
Hmm.
couldn't crowdfund, because you can't crowdfund until you're 501(c)(3) authorized, which I didn't realize,
Hmm.
because I'm from corporate world. I'm not from the nonprofit world. I do have
Hmm.
quite extensive accounting background. I have an accounting
Hmm.
degree. I worked for Covanta Energy. I was the regional accounting manager for 13 plants
Hmm.
for them across the country. So I'm kind of treating this nonprofit as
Hmm.
a for-purpose business, which I
Right.
think a lot of people don't. They just treat it as a nonprofit, and
Right.
that does not, we have to get viable revenue streams, multiple revenue streams to make
Hmm.
something sustainable in the
Right.
future. You can't just rely on grants, and you can't just rely on, getting contracts with school districts and things like that, because you might
Hmm.
not get that.
Hmm.
So we really had difficulty trying to raise money. Then we did a goat yoga fundraiser, and then we started crowdfunding a bit. And we've actually just had a big spurt in um, our board. We have 6 people that joined
Hmm.
with various um, different specialties that are important to us. We have someone who actually is a regional director of uh, a private school, where she goes around the country and she runs these schools. So she knows how
Hmm.
to start up a school
Hmm.
from the beginning and run with it. So we
Hmm.
needed that.
Hmm.
We have someone who's an agricultural guru and a contractor. So he's definitely somebody we need. And we have the 2 autistic women,
Hmm.
as well as we have somebody who now is a marketing and fundraising expert, which we needed, because
Oh yeah, I need one of those.
that's that's like the hardest thing, I think, for me,
Yeah.
being in the nonprofit world, coming
Yeah.
from corporate America. You have
Yeah.
revenues and you have a product, and it's
Right.
different than asking somebody to invest in you,
Right.
when it's different. Your
Right.
product is, what you're
Right.
bringing to the table for
Yeah.
people.
So is
So
the
we're
school
based.
open yet or no?
No, the school is not
Okay.
open yet, because we
Okay.
need land. We need
Got it.
some serious fundraising to get land. But our goal is, we did a few workshops, but we want to do a weekend program
Hmm.
in 2024, where we're going to have um, every weekend, where we're going to start out with some trades where
Hmm.
people can come and learn, and we'll be doing something weekly, because
Hmm.
really, to do our methodology, we need enough time with somebody to really figure out where we can help them, where their strengths are. Just doing a workshop, you can
Right.
do any kind of workshop you want, but you're really not going to get the kind of results and statistics that we want to be able to present when we're going for these larger grants for land, and
Hmm.
saying we want to open this as a school.
Right.
So that's part of it. And then the other thing we're actually doing, because we want to expand our reach, because the idea is never just to be one school in New Jersey. I
Hmm.
think a lot of times I want to change the whole system. So in
Hmm.
order to do that, I have to expand throughout the country,
Yeah. Okay.
and possibly throughout the world. If I could do it, I'm doing it. I'm going to
Hmm.
continue to go as far as I can go.
Hmm.
And the idea being that
So
we
you want a
expanded.
school and the whole and a village, basically.
Mhm.
What and housing, you
Yes,
said,
because
right?
there would be
Okay.
housing in the village. Yes.
Okay. What do you say?
Um,
What's the village?
the village would be housing, as well as other businesses there. The goal to be, really supporting autistics to become entrepreneurs, if
Hmm.
they can do it.
Hmm.
Sometimes they can't do the business piece of it. A lot
Hmm.
of autistics, because I'm on LinkedIn, and I have a large network of people, including autistics, that are professionals out there, and their
Hmm.
biggest challenge is they don't know the business side of it. So they have a lot of good ideas for businesses,
Hmm.
but they can't get them off the ground, or they've attempted to get them off the ground and they've had to fold because they don't understand the business piece of it. But if
Right.
we were able to support that for them,
Hmm.
I think we could, build wealth in the community,
Hmm.
as well as provide services that are specifically tailored to
Hmm.
autistic people in
Hmm.
this village,
Yeah. Yeah, because a
including
big
housing.
problem is employment after
Right.
21. It's the after 21, that's my whole thing that I've been, moaning about for years, is everything falls off the cliff after 21.
Right.
And like you said, I've had friends that have had bad experiences of their young adult sons trying to work at Stop and Shop, and it's just like it just doesn't work. It's just not the right job for him, and just trying to find the right employment for them, trying to find what they enjoy, what they're good at, something besides my son was in a day program where they just made him sort chips all day. He was bored out of his mind because that's all they assumed that he could do.
Right. And,
You know,
and that's
yeah, it's crazy. And there's nothing out there. And so somebody has to create, you just have to create it. You have to create what's needed, and that's what you're doing. So,
right. That's what I'm doing. And that's why I'm looking, for other parents to get involved, other
mhm,
nonprofits to get involved, because we're all stronger together to really make
yep,
change. We have to collaborate together, because
yep.
one small school somewhere is, wow, everybody can say, great, you did great. But if you're not really getting in the system and saying,
Yeah, but this is more
we're
about
coming,
changing the system, which definitely needs to be done.
right. It's just, it needs to be done
Hmm.
from the time where our children are diagnosed,
Hmm.
even before then, because I think the medical community is not really, it doesn't have enough training. No one has enough training. I think in most cases, in school systems, in day programs, you're getting people, and a lot of times the people are underpaid, so that, you're paying somebody minimum wage, and you're
You're
expecting,
preaching to the choir.
right, and you're expecting them to basically take care of your child, and here have a
Hmm.
crumb, and
Yeah,
we're expecting you to know everything about
right.
autism and things like that, and that's just not,
Hmm.
a way for people to do that. In
Yeah,
fact, it's not only compensation as in compensating people with money. You could be compensating people with training so they can better themselves, and
right.
they have a pathway to advancement. So they're like,
Yeah,
hey, I'm into this because I know I can go somewhere with this,
right,
instead of this is where I'm stuck for the rest of my life. And, you want people that are invested in our children.
right,
And the way you get them to invest is not only finding good people, but finding people and helping them. So by helping them, you're
right,
helping yourself, right?
right, right. My interview before you was with Christopher Menente from Rutgers.
Right.
Do you know of him? He is he wants to create an actual new job, um and a new curriculum that trains people in how to work with people with autism, specifically, I think more adults, not teachers of special ed, but adults, so that, like you're saying, it's these people that have no training and are minimum wage jobs that are working with our kids that don't know anything about autism. He's trying to he's trying to fix that. So,
Right. And that's so important, because that's who's really going to make the
yeah,
difference. I mean, as much as we want to make the difference,
yeah,
we're not with our children 24/7,
right.
especially,
Hmm.
we
Yep.
want them to have some kind of independence from us.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um,
And I
because
think
when
the
we're
number
gone,
one thing that parents worry about is what's going to happen when I'm not here anymore. That's their
mhm,
biggest concern,
yeah,
you
of
know.
course, because it's
And
like my child can't communicate. No one knows how to work with him.
right,
How is he going to be happy
right.
in a life where, no one knows how to meet his needs,
Right.
even at a
Hmm.
basic level.
Right.
Um,
Right. So, all right, we've been talking a long time and we need to wrap it up. So let's give out your contact info if anybody wants to learn more about what you're doing, they want to help out in any way. How can they
yes.
reach you?
Well, our website is www.spectrumtechtradeschool.com. And I can be reached at Lisa, Lisa, at spectrumtechtradeschool.com. Email me. Um, we also have a YouTube channel. Um, we are on Instagram and Facebook. Instagram is at Spectrum Tech Trade School. There you'll see the beautiful photography that my son does, and you can even see, I put some things in reels and to music, because that's the thing now, to do it with reels. But
Yeah.
he is extremely talented, and don't think that your child can't do things, because if I would have listened to anybody, my son would not be taking the pictures that he's taking, because they make a lot of assumptions about him, give him kindergarten work at 17 and things like
Hmm.
that, because they think he can't do anything. So, you know, definitely, we would love to hear from you. Get involved, subscribe to our newsletter because we are coming out with in 2024. Goal is Q1 to have the autistic adults on our board actually create learning modules for people, and that will be available. I believe we're going to go with Patreon on Patreon for minimal fee, and 25% of the sales are going to pay autistic adults. So,
Awesome. All right, terrific. Okay, we're going to log off, but don't go anywhere. Okay, thank you, Lisa, for being here today and sharing your story with us.
okay, great. Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye-bye. That's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed listening and it helped you gain a new perspective. To learn more about our children's book series, Robbie's World and His Spectrum of Adventures, or to learn more about what we do at Robbie's World Foundation, simply visit our website at robbiesworldbook.com.
Thank you for joining us today. Be sure to join us again on our next episode of Spectrum Perspectives.